wouldn't Chris Greer then change his tune about, yeah, we're not trading anybody, if ownership said you lose your job unless you take a different approach to the trade deadline? Or was this, best to your knowledge, ownership saying full vote of no confidence? We just don't want you to be the one to make these trades. We're done now. Like, which one was it, do you think, Tom?
Well, Stephen Ross has a great deal of affection for Chris Greer, who's been in the organization for like a quarter century.
Right.
It was framed by the club as a mutual parting of ways. They had a conversation. And listen, Chris Greer, I don't know that it would be entirely fair to Chris to put him in a position, much like you remember Reggie McKenzie was in his final year with the Raiders, where John Gruden had effectively taken over all things in football operations. He essentially made Reggie McKenzie trade away all of his best draft picks, including Khalil Mack, and then fired him that December. This allows Chris to walk away from it at this point, to allow people who might be around. And listen, Champ just got there. He was hired this year as a senior personnel executive. I saw him briefly in training camp. He may not be a part of the long-term vision either, but at least it allows there to be sort of a reset here. It certainly is going to generate more phone calls as this thing rolls forward. And the next question then becomes, is Mike McDaniel going to be a part of the club into 2026? And here's what I would say on that front, Rich. Mike is another guy that Stephen Ross believes in. He extended his contract in the prior offseason in 2024. He has shown that he can be an effective NFL coach. He has been to the playoffs. He has won games. He came into this season with a winning record. Obviously, this season has not gone his way. But take into account the broader picture of where we are right now with the Dolphins. They are locked in with Tua Tagovailoa for over $50 million fully guaranteed in 2026. And I brought this up on this show a month or so ago when questions were first really arising about Mike McDaniel's status. If you were to fire Mike McDaniel, which again, is it possible that happens? Sure. We got to see how, the next couple of games go. They're in Spain in a couple of weeks, and then obviously they've got a bye and then a half dozen games after that. Let's see how the rest of the season finishes. But I would just say Tua at over $50 million fully guaranteed might not be an extremely attractive option to head coaching candidates who are coming in, especially given his medical history and the up and down state of his play through the course of 2025 here. There is certainly a scenario, and again, we will see exactly how this goes, but there is certainly a scenario in my mind where you take a vision to what's going on with the bigger football operation here, bring in a person or multiple people to try to get things right, keep Mike McDaniel for one more run with Tua, who is a quarterback who Mike got the job in part because he was the one coaching candidate back in 2022 who said, I can win with this guy. Give him one more shot with a lot of different moves in terms of personnel, with a new GM or maybe a head of football operations calling the shots here. And then you make the decisions at the end of 2026. By and large, I'm not a fan of jagged transitions. I'm a believer that if you get people who are on the same timeline and reboot the whole thing at once, that has advantages. But in a case like this, where you're tied for that much money to a quarterback that the coach has shown he can get the most out of, at least he has over the first few years that Mike and Tua were together, don't discount the possibility here of Mike McDaniel still getting another crack at this in 2026.
Well, that's interesting because, again, so the choices would be, let's hire a new general manager, and you tell the new GM you have to keep the coach, and obviously you're keeping the quarterback because that's the we're not dead capping to the tune of some insane number, and you have to wonder what general manager you'd want would take that job, or you tell a general manager, you hire whichever coach you want, but you got to tell the coach that Tua is your quarterback for at least a year, and you're implying basically what coach would want to do something like that based on what we're seeing from Tua this year. Am I missing either of the doors here for them to go through?
It quite possibly would be a deterrent to a new head coach to be told, essentially, I mean, yes, you could eat that cash and have all the cap accelerate, but that's not an ideal situation. And while I would never say any player is untradeable, I would say that Tua's contract is virtually untradeable. So barring them just cutting him, which, we saw Russell Wilson, they ate a bunch of money, they took the cap hits and they dealt with it. Barring that type of a scenario, Tua is going to be the Dolphins quarterback in 2026, as long as his health permits that. A new head coach coming into that, you're talking about not a lost season, but certainly a season where you're not going to be able to affect the deep type of changes you might think that you need to make in the organization. I would say this too, and again, Chris Greer is a very nice man who I've gotten to know over the years, has always, treated people around him well. But when other general managers within the league looked at what is holding back the Dolphins, one thing they always said was it seemed like you had this collection of talent versus building a team. It was hard at times to tell what was the vision, what was the roster building plan that they felt like were going to allow the Dolphins to get into the playoffs and win a playoff game for the first time in however 20 years or so it's been for them. Even this offseason, think back to the way that Miami navigated this. They had made a decision shortly after the season last year to trade Jalen Ramsey, but they really didn't ramp that up until April. You end up not trading Jalen Ramsey until the week of the 4th of July. You do that while also trading away your tight end. You acquire a guy in Minkah Fitzpatrick who's available from Pittsburgh, in part because the tape just wasn't the same on Minkah for a couple of years. Then you acquire a Darren Waller who'd been out of football, looked great, obviously, for a few games. Then he gets hurt. In camp, everybody knew they were short on corners after trading Jalen Ramsey. You're signing Jack Jones, you're signing Roswell Douglas, and you're rolling them out there to play games. Those were all some of the factors that when people evaluated the Dolphins, it just didn't entirely make sense the way that they were approaching things. Now, that's not to say that the failures of this season are all on Chris Greer. Last night, I don't think, especially in the first half, that I sat back and said, boy, this team is at such a talent deficit, they can't hang with the Ravens. Baltimore went right down the field on the first couple of drives and scored touchdowns, but the defense rose up after that. You saw that pass rush get after it a little bit. You saw Roswell Douglas play really well in that game. Offensively, Jalen Waddle has a heck of a night, but everything else was just disjointed. 4 days before that, they'd gone into Atlanta.
Yeah, they look great.
And you said, oh, this is the team. This is the offense that we were used to seeing. Tua played really well. And then last night, it's a false start on 4th and 1. And it's a 4th and 2 play where you got Devon Achane running a route against an all-pro safety in Kyle Hamilton. And I know that they liked that matchup in terms of Achane being able to – they liked the look that they were getting. But, if you were – and Mike's a lot smarter than I am with scheme. But, if you're drawing this up, I don't know that I want Devon Achane running a route like a slot receiver against Kyle Hamilton with the game on the line. And then it seems like he loses the ball in the lights, which happened a few times last night. They miss a field goal. There were all these individual mistakes in the game, and that's kind of been the story of the Dolphins season. So there's a lot of different ways, Rich, that this thing can still go. And there's a lot of ways it can go in terms of Mike McDaniel. There's really not that many ways it can go with Tua. You're paying him either to be your quarterback or you're paying him to not be your quarterback. But you've got the opportunity starting in these next 4 days to potentially be aggressive. Jalen Waddle, it would surprise me if they trade him just because look at how important he is to this team, and you've got him locked in, cost controlled, at least in the short term here. But all the edge rushers, all the other guys you can get value from, the fact you might have a high draft pick in 2026, which also bears mentioning, Rich, right now does not look like the deepest class for franchise quarterbacks. So maybe not drafting your franchise quarterback in 2026 might actually be advantageous. Load up on picks, maximize what you're gaining in terms of draft capital, and maybe that opportunity is there in 2027.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Check us out every single day streaming live on Disney Plus and the ESPN app 12 to 3 Eastern.